Thank you. Let us invoke the universal invocation. O hidden life, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May each who feels himself as one with thee know he is also one with every other. Let us have 1 minute silence. Thank you. So, Sister Vibha ji will continue the letter as per chronological. It is letter number 18, and as she has already completed up to slide number 7, so I now request her to continue with slide number 8. Thank you. Welcome you, Sister Vibha ji.
Thank you, Brother Pradeep ji. Can I please have the permission to share the slides?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so I think we have completed up to slide number 7 in our last session. So namaste and good evening to all. We will continue our session on this chronological letter number 18. And this letter is basically, it was received in 1881, July of 1881 by Senate, and it is written by Mahatma K.H. This letter, as we have seen, it marks the beginning of philosophical and theoretical teachings. So just a quick recap. In the beginning part of this letter, Mahatma Ji spoke about Stanton Moses. Stanton Moses was an English clergyman, and he had dormant psychic powers, which the Mahatmas thought that they could be developed, and Moses could be useful for spreading the theosophical teachings in the Western world. So they put him on probation, and they were testing him. Now, this person, Stanton Moses, he was being guided he had a spiritual guide called Imperator. And at different points in time, different people or different beings were his guide. So we know from the letters that at least sometime or the other, one of the adept brothers was guiding him. At other times, it was Moses' own higher self. And yet at other times, it was some astral entity, maybe with negative influence. Now, at the same time, Moses was totally confused. He couldn't make out the difference between embodied and disembodied beings, elementals and elementaries, and he didn't believe in the existence of the Mahatmas. Then further in the letter, Mahatma Ji also spoke about the planetary spirit. The highest planetary spirits, they are basically the guides. They are the guides or the rulers of the planet. And they appear at the start of every root race and at the start and close of every grand cycle. And their mission is to sound the keynote of truth. So this is what we had seen till now. Now we'll continue further. Ever since, slide number 8. Ever since 1876, acting under direct orders, she, meaning HPB, She tried to awaken him to the reality of what was going on around and in him. He saw her on several occasions, and sometimes, knowing it was HPB, he could not recognize her. In every letter of his, he clamored for a living brother to her unequivocal statement that there was one already having charge of him. He strongly objected. When helped to get free from his too material body, consci- uh, absent, absent from it for hours and days, sometimes his empty machine run during that period from afar by external living influence. As soon as back, he would begin laboring under the ineradicable impression of having been all the time the vehicle for another intelligence, a disembodied, not embodied spirit. Truth never once flashing across his mind. So here Mahatma Ji is saying that ever since 1876, that was the year when Stanton Moses was admitted to the Theosophical Society as a member. So ever since that time, he the masters had ordered Madame Blavatsky to help him to realize what was going on in his inner world, because Stanton Moses was always full of doubt. He could not realize who are the astral entities and who are the adepts who are guiding him. So they ordered HPB to help him to realize that how this inner world works and what is going on in his inner world. She helped him to learn how to project his astral self. So you can see this in the figure on the right side of the slide. It is a painting of Stanton Moses' astral body. So this was actually precipitated. Madame Blavatsky precipitated this painting that shows Moses in progress, attempting to consciously project his astral double. And this is available in the archives of the Theosophical Society. So several times Stanton Moses, he saw Madame Blavatsky, that would be in the astral form, in the subtle form. He saw her, but he could not recognize her. And he kept on insisting that he wants to have a real master, a person who's alive. He should be the master and he should guide him. Because he had this misconception that if he sees anybody in the subtle world, it means they are already dead. That means they are disembodied. So that was his misconception, that the people in the subtle world, they have no physical existence. And so for the same reason, he did not believe when Madame Blavatsky told him that one of the masters is already in charge of him. He did not believe her because he thought that they are all dead people, they are only disembodied beings. So in his trainings, he would be helped to move out of his physical body into his astral body, and he would leave his physical body behind. For the duration for which his physical body would be left, the trainers would ensure that the normal action of his physical body was still carried out. He would continue living normally. And even if that was for a prolonged time, this would be ensured. But when Moses would re enter his physical body, he always believed that his body had been used as a vehicle by some disembodied spirit. So he was totally under this delusion, and no amount of teaching or guiding him was able to get him out of these delusions. Then Mahatmaji says that Imperator, he wrote to her, meaning Stanton Moses wrote to HPB, Imperator traverses your idea about mediumship. He says there should be no real antagonism between the medium and the adept. Had he used the word seer instead of medium, the idea would have been rendered more correctly. For a man becomes rarely an adept without being born a natural seer. So this is a very important statement. We need to have clarity about who is a medium, who is a seer, and who is an adept. Stanton Moses believes that Imperator told him there's no real difference or contradiction between a medium and an adept. They are one and the same. Both can do the same things. But Master clarifies that only a seer can become an adept. Mediums cannot become an adept. Now, who is a medium? So we have already seen that medium is a person who can supposedly communicate between dead and living. Actually, what happens that the free will of the medium becomes totally passive, and his own astral spirit is occupied by a shell or a elemental. Shell is a elementary, the spook, or it can also be an elemental. So they occupy the astral spirit of the medium, and this opens the door of communication between the astral world and the terrestrial world. So mediumship is actually totally opposite to adeptship, and it is strongly discouraged. Theosophy strongly discourages this kind of uh, communication with the astral world. Because medium, he becomes a passive instrument of the foreign influences. All these astral entities, they are able to influence the medium because his will has become passive. Whereas the adept, he actively controls himself and all such kind of inferior potencies. Now, what is a seer? Mahatma Ji says seer can become an adept. So who is a seer? Obviously, seer is a person who can see. And what can he see? So he is able to see the truths which are on the plane of the higher mental or the buddhic plane. See, our ego basically is Atma Buddhi Manas, and it is of the same essence as the universal mind. So it is omniscient on its own plane. It is all knowing. The knowledge of past, present, and future, everything is available at that plane. Now, it is from this source, from this fountainhead of knowledge on this higher mental plane, that sometimes the lower manas can catch a glimpse of it. So, when the lower manas catches a glimpse of it and the memory is brought back into the physical brain, then the person can see the things which are beyond the ordinary senses of man. But this state is extremely rare. And how does a seer obtain his visions? Why not everyone? Why everyone cannot obtain, but a seer can? So there are three ways by which a seer is able to get his vision. The first state is in which he will willfully paralyze his memory and also all the instinctual actions of his physical body. So memory and instinctual actions, they are all paralyzed. This is basically the kriya of Hatha Yoga. So by this first method, second method is the person may have attained the highest state of holiness through right effort and purity in previous life. So this is basically Raj Yoga, purity and holiness and right effort, all which he would have obtained through efforts in his previous life. And the third method is due to extreme weakness of the physical body, extreme exhaustion of the physical body. Also, when a person is extremely sick, all this weakness and exhaustion, it comes. Or there could be some illness. So, due to these factors also, these are physical factors. Due to these factors also, the person may be able to get some, it may happen conditions that he can see the higher things. Now, the adept. So this person is a seer. He has no control, but he gets the visions whenever any of these three conditions arise. But the third person, who's an adept, he is the one who has reached the appropriate stage of initiation. He has become a master in the science of esoteric philosophy. And there are high adepts who are the initiates of various degrees. There are 7 such degrees. These high adepts are working for the welfare of humanity, and they are also known as masters of wisdom or Mahatmas or Arhats or simply brothers. So in terms of initiations, they have achieved the 5th initiation and more. And they have no more to learn in the human kingdom. All that is there to learn in the human kingdom has been completed by them. They are liberated. In fact, they are Jivan Mukt. And their will has become one with the universal will. So such an adept, he may choose to remain on earth in his physical body. This is important. He may choose to remain on earth in his physical body. So he is not disembodied. He is there in his physical body, but even in his waking consciousness, he is always centered in the Atmic plane, which is the plane of Nirvana. And when he is out of his physical body, then his consciousness may rise even higher to the monadic planes and higher planes. So it is very clear that adepts are not disembodied beings like what Stanton Moses thought. Then in the second point, in September 1875, he knew nothing of the brothers of shadow, our greatest, most cruel, and why not confess it, our most potential enemies. In that year, he actually asked the old lady whether Bulwer had been eating underdone pork chops and dreaming when he described that hideous dweller on the threshold. Make yourself ready, she answered. In about 12 months more, you will have to face and fight them. So there is this term brothers of shadow. Brothers of shadows, they are also adepts, but they are the black adepts. They follow the left-handed path. They have a high degree of knowledge about esoteric science, but their motives are selfish. And they may also command the elementals with malefic intent. That is why Master calls them potent enemies. Then there is mentioned dweller of the threshold. This dweller of the threshold, he was actually a character in the novel Zanoni. This novel was written by Edward Bulwer Lytton. We have come across him in the previous letter. And in this novel, he created this dweller on the threshold, this character, as a malevolent entity who is the embodiment of everything that is negative or darkness in the person, which has accumulated through all his previous incarnations. So the sum total of all darkness in a person, that is the character in that novel. But actually in occultism, there is the dweller. It is basically a shell. Shell meaning the Kamrup. It is the shell of the previous incarnation of an extremely materialistic person. So ordinarily what happens that the Kamrup disintegrates after some period. When the person has physically death has occurred, person has passed away, then in the astral plane that Kamrup will exist for some time and disintegrate after some period. And the ego will go into Devachan. And eventually the ego will reincarnate. But in certain cases, the karmic desires and passions, they are so intense that the Kamrup will persist in the Kamlok, even beyond the Devachanic period of the ego. So ego has completed Devachanic period, it has reincarnated, but that Kamrup is still existing of the previous incarnation. And by affinity, it will be drawn towards this reincarnated ego. And it will fasten on to the principle of Kam of the new entity. So this, makes the principle of Kam even more potent in the incarnated ego, which is quite dangerous. And this such an entity is called dweller on the threshold. So this can be a real occurrence in the real world. This is as per occultism. Now Stanton Moses, he did not know that the dweller can be a real entity in the astral world. So he sarcastically asks that Bulwer had been eating or dreaming, what he had been eating or dreaming to create such a hideous character in his novel, Zanoni. To which HPB replies that in about a year, Stanton Moses himself will have to fight such entities and then he will realize their reality. Then in October 1876, they had begun their work upon him. I am fighting, he wrote, a hand-to-hand battle with all the legions of the fiends. For the past 3 weeks, my nights are made hideous with their torments, temptations, and foul suggestions. I see them all around, glaring at me, gabbling, howling, grinning. Every form of filthy suggestion, of bewildering doubt, of mad and shuddering fear is upon me. I can understand Zanoni's dweller now. I have not wavered yet, and their temptations are fainter, the presence less near, the horror less. So just as HPB had predicted, exactly in the same way, Stanton Moses started being tormented by these evil astral entities. The next point, one night she had prostrated herself before her superior, one of the few things they fear, praying him to wave his hand across the ocean, lest Stanton Moses should die and the Theosophical Society lose its best subject. He must be tried, was the answer. So what is being said here is that Madame Blavatsky, she earnestly implored her master. She prostrated herself in front of him, meaning Sashtang pranam, that kind of thing, to prostrate yourself in front of. And she implored, she requested the master to use his high powers and stop these torments of Stanton Moses. Otherwise, he could even die. Now, why it is mentioned that this is one of the few things they fear? That means the master fears such kind of thing. It is not the astral entities. What he fears is that the Chela is imploring him, is requesting him earnestly, that she prostrated and she is asking for something which cannot be done. So master has to refuse her. This is what they don't like. They fear this, that a Chela should raise a request which they have to say no to. So HPP was an accepted Chela of Mahatma M, and she was requesting him. She was requesting something from the master to which he had to refuse her, because in their great wisdom, the master knows what needs to be done. Stanton Moses had to be tested, and he was under probation. So Mahatma M could not do anything to stop all those astral, those tormenting entities. Last point. He imagines that Imperator had sent the tempters because he, Stanton Moses, was one of those Thomases who must see. He would not believe that Imperator could not help their coming. The plus sign denotes Imperator. So in this point, Thomas refers to a person who will refuse to believe until he has direct personal experience. Why is such a person called Thomas? Because it is a reference to the Apostle Thomas. Jesus had 12 apostles. Apostles are his disciples who went out to preach his teachings. So 12 apostles were there. Thomas was one of them. And he refused to believe that Jesus had resurrected. After his crucifixion, Jesus arose from the grave. So he refused to believe that Jesus had resurrected and appeared to the other apostles until he could see and feel Jesus's crucifixion wounds for himself. So he was doubting that unless he saw it for himself. So Stanton Moses is comparing himself to Apostle Thomas. He thinks that his spiritual guide, the Imperator, has sent these astral tempters so that Stanton Moses can have direct personal experience about them. He could not realize that these demons were of his own making. Even the Imperator could not stop their coming because they were due to Moses himself, not due to Imperator. Then we move further. The last statement of the previous slide said that Imperator could not help their coming. Watch over him he did, meaning the Imperator kept a watch over him. Watch over him he did. He could not drive them away unless the victim, the neophyte himself, proved the strongest. But did these human fiends, in league with the elementaries, prepare him for a new life as he thought they would? Embodiments of those adverse influences which beset the inner self, struggling to be free and to progress. They would never have returned had he successfully conquered them by asserting his own independent will, by giving up his mediumship, his passive will. Yet they did. So Imperator was keeping a watch over Stanton Moses. Stanton Moses himself alone could have removed these demons by strongly asserting his will, and no one else could do it for him. So he had to develop his own strong will, which he did not because he was a medium. So his will was passive. And so the evil astral spirits, they kept returning. And they could not give him that new life as they had promised. They couldn't lead him to any new life. These were all astral entities, fiends, monsters. They were in league with the elementaries. Elementaries are the spooks, the empty astral shells. So nothing of what was promised. They cannot deliver anything. They are merely empty shells. And because of Stanton Moses' passive will, they kept returning again and again because they could control his will. HPP never told you he was Stanton Moses' astral soul. He meaning Imperator. Imperator was Moses' astral soul. But that what he often mistook for Imperator was his own higher self, his divine Atma, not Ling Sharir or astral soul, or the Kamrup, the independent doppelganger ganger again. So here Mahatma KH has clarified beyond doubt that the Imperator on this occasion was Stanton Moses' own higher self. What is the higher self? It is the higher Manas, Atma Buddhi Manas. So the higher Manas, the Atma Buddhi Manas, that is his higher self, which was his Atma, his inner voice, and not any other lower principle. It was not the astral soul, it was not the Kamrup, it was no lower principle or lower entity. It was the voice of his Atma. But Stanton Moses mistook it for a disembodied spirit guide, which he kept calling Imperator. Then the last point, Imperator cannot contradict himself. Imperator cannot be ignorant of the truth, so often misrepresented by Stanton Moses. Imperator cannot preach the occult sciences and then defend mediumship, not even in that highest form described by his pupil. Mediumship is abnormal. So because Imperator was Stanton Moses' higher self, the voice of his Atma, so naturally this higher self is of the same essence as the universal mind. Hence it is omniscient. Therefore, it cannot give contradictory ideas which are untrue. How can the light of the Atma say anything which is contradicting its own self? It cannot be untrue. Occult science rightly explains that the astral entities and influences, affirming that the strong will alone can overcome them. So, mediumship requires a passive will. And it is only that if he asserted his will, then he can overcome the astral influences. So Stanton Moses often misrepresented whatever internal impressions he received from his own self. He misunderstood them and he misrepresented them. And here Mahatmaji mentions that mediumship is abnormal. That is making the will passive to be influenced by external entities. This is not the natural way of spiritual progress. Thinking that if a person is a medium, then he can progress spiritually, that is totally untrue because he has a passive will. It is abnormal. It does not lead to spiritual progress. The path to adeptship demands cultivating a strong willpower and control over the inferior potencies. So see how much stress Mahatmaji has laid in this letter, not to make your will passive. This is one of the most important points we need to keep in mind. We have to develop our own willpower and assert our will. The next point, we move to the next slide. When in further development, the abnormal has given way to the natural, the controls are shaken off, and passive obedience is no longer required, then the medium learns to use his will to exercise his own power and become an adept. The process is one of development and the neophyte has to go to the end. As long as he is subject to occasional trance, he cannot be an adept. Stanton Moses passes the 2/3 of his life in trance. So see again the same thing, develop the will. Here Mahatmaji says abnormal has given way to the natural. So see what is natural? Developing your will. Mediumship is abnormal and natural is asserting your will. This same psychic ability, the psychic ability was there in Stanton Moses, but it was dormant. And he had a passive will. The same psychic ability, if it was backed by a strong will, then it would become the natural course of development towards adeptship. This is what the Mahatmas were trying for Stanton Moses. Then the aspirant is not in a trance or under the control of astral entities. When he asserts his will, obviously he cannot be under the control of external astral entities. He does not obey them, but asserts his own free will and power over them. So this was the case with HPB. She also had very strong psychic abilities and mediumistic capabilities since her childhood. She was able to communicate with the beings of the subtle world. And during her training in Tibet, she learned how to channel these abilities in the development of spiritual powers, the natural way for spiritual progress. And she developed her own willpower. She learned to command the entities of the astral world instead of being a passive, obedient person to them. So there is much more in her training which we don't know, but definitely these things she was trained for, which Stanton Moses is not able to grasp. Then another point here is that once started on this path, that means on the occult training, once the occult training begins, the aspirant must go to the end. That is, he must reach the goal of becoming an adept or whatever, of learning all these occult powers, of learning the command over them. This master has mentioned in his earlier letter too. He says that the aspirant cannot stop, nor can he turn back, or he will fall back. He must go to the end. So this is one important point one has to keep in mind. If one is not prepared, if one is not ready, it is better to live your normal life. Nobody is asking you to become a chela. But once you start on that path, you have to go to the end. Otherwise, it is dangerous. So this must be kept in mind. Next point. To your question, is Imperator a planetary spirit? And may a planetary spirit have been humanly incarnated? I will first say that there can be no planetary spirit that was not once material or what you call human. So human means what? We are all human beings. Human beings are mortal beings. Mortal meaning we'll be born and then after some time, after a life period, there will be death will follow. So mortal beings, every planetary spirit has to have passed through that stage of mortality. Not necessarily here on the earth. They could have been on any other world apart from our earth. What it only means is that they too have taken birth on the physical plane or terrestrial plane, and then they die and they are reborn. So that stage of mortality is what it means to be human. Now, earlier also in this beginning part of the letter, we spoke about the planetary spirits. Planetary spirits are basically the guides of the nascent humanity, and they are present or they come at the start of every cycle, major cycle and minor cycle. Now, currently, we are in which cycle? We are in the fourth round. Our physical earth is the fourth globe of the chain. The chain consists of 7 globes. We are on the fourth globe. And on this globe, we are the 5th root race. So we can actually count like how many times the planetary spirit has occurred or been present on our planet. In fact, this period which we are now in currently, there has not been sufficient time for the humanity to evolve its own lofty planetary spirit. From our humanity, we have not been able to produce these highest planetary spirit. So to guide our humanity, such planetary spirits have had to come from other worlds like Venus. And those planetary spirits have definitely crossed the age of being mortal in their own world. So that is what Mahatma Ji means when he says that there can be no planetary spirit that was not once material, not or what you call human. Then in the last point, when our great Buddha, the patron of all adepts, the reformer and the codifier of the occult system, reached first nirvana on earth, he became a planetary spirit. his spirit could at one and the same time rove the interstellar spaces in full consciousness and continue at will on earth in his original and individual body. Now, in this cycle, Gautam Buddha was the first of our humanity to have attained the planetary spirit. Prior to that, the humanity could not produce any planetary spirit. In this cycle, in the previous cycle, yes, maybe when we read our scriptures, we see those rishis and great rishis and adepts. But in this cycle, Gautam Buddha was the first from our humanity to have reached the stage of planetary spirit. Consciousness, when they reach that stage, then consciousness unfolds to the atmic level and beyond. It means even to the higher planes, to such an extent that it includes even the interstellar spaces. So their physical body will continue to remain on earth in waking consciousness, and their higher consciousness will include even the interstellar spaces. That is the meaning that they can move about through any planets or any other stellar bodies. So this is nirvana. This is the direct experience and the firm establishment of that all-inclusive I-ness, which Buddha reached. Okay, then the next slide, number 13. For the divine self has so completely disfranchised itself from matter that it could create at will an inner substitute for itself, and leaving it in the human form for days, weeks, sometimes years, affect in no wise by the change either the vital principle or the physical mind of its body. This point is actually in continuation from the previous slide, where the last point says his spirit could continue at one and the same time, rove the interstellar spaces in full consciousness, and continue at will on earth in its original and individual body. And in that individual body, he is continuing for days and weeks and years. But his divine self has totally disengaged and from this matter. And it has just created a substitute which is continuing the human body on earth. Whereas, whereas the divine being is working on the higher planes. So when I was reading this point, one thought came to my mind that Sri Krishna has said to Arjun in the Bhagavad Gita. What Sri Krishna says, I exist while sustaining this whole creation by one fraction of my being. So that is the macrocosm. I exist while still sustaining the whole creation by one fraction of my being, and the rest is still existing. So same thing here we can see when Gautam Buddha, he has attained that level. His physical body is there on the earth. He is sustaining it not only for days or weeks, but years together, while his divine spirit, his divine self, it has completely disfranchised itself from matter. It is no longer on this plane. It is on the higher planes. So this is the kind of power which the divine self has. It can sustain the lower bodies while existing as a conscious planetary spirit in the higher and spiritual worlds. In the course of the evolution of the universe, the divine self, we know it involves itself in matter. It gets wielded by matter. So it becomes limited. The divine powers become limited. But as evolution happens, as the spiritual progress happens, then this will eventually lead to the stage of high planetary spirit. At that time, the divine spark once again becomes totally free from matter. That is disfranchised, totally free from matter. Then the latent powers of divine self will become active to such an extent that the mere intention of the exalted being can work miracles. He only has to think about it. His mere intention will manifest what he wants. He will simply will, and that willpower brings everything into being. So, such a planetary spirit, he is able to create an inner substitute for himself. This inner substitute is basically the sustainer, the manas or the thinker, who carries on the vital functions of the physical body, which is existing on uh, the earth. And by merely willing, the planetary spirit can create such substitute for its lower self, while he himself is free to function as a conscious being in the higher and spiritual worlds. So this also gives us an idea of what kind of work these high planetary spirits do. They are here and they are there. They are everywhere. Next point. By the way,
उससे कुछ हुआ फायदा हुआ
Yes, Vibhaji, continue. I muted all. You kindly unmute yourself and continue. Vibhaji, unmute yourself, continue. Please.
yes, I did. Okay, second point. By the way, that is the highest form of adeptship man can hope for on our planet. But it is as rare as the Buddhas themselves. The last Kobilgan who reached it being Tsongkhapa of Kokonor, 14th century, the reformer of esoteric as well as vulgar Lamaism. So in this cycle, becoming a planetary spirit is the highest form of adeptship that any human being can reach. And rarely any person is able to reach this exalted stage. Mahatma Ji says that the last Kobilgan is a Mongolian term, and it refers to the higher or the initiated lamas of Tibet, those who are considered incarnations of a Buddha-like spirit. So not incarnation of Buddha, but Buddha-like spirit. So such people, such initiated lamas are called Kobilgans in Mongolian terms. So in 14th century, this Kobilgan, whose name was Tsongkhapa, he was able to achieve this exalted state. He became a planetary spirit. So that was the last person whom we know who has achieved that state. About Tsongkhapa, HPB has mentioned that he was a great adept. And during the time he lived in the 14th century, Buddhism was again becoming degrading. It was degrading because of the people, those priests at that time. They made Buddhism a marketable commodity. It is as good as selling religion. You give me money, I'll do this for you. So they had made these false priests. They desecrated Buddhism and made it a marketable commodity. And this thing, Tsongkhapa, he was not able to bear this. So he led a revolution to end all this. And by this revolution, 40,000 sham monks and lamas were exiled from the countries. That means those who were fraudulent or indulging in such kind of practices. 40,000, they were exiled from the country. So Tsongkhapa, he is rightly regarded as the reformer of esoteric as well as the exoteric Lamaism by Mahatma K.H. because he actually led that revolt. Then the last point mentions, many are those who break through the eggshell. Few who once out are able to exercise their nirira namastak fully when completely out of the body. Conscious life in spirit is as difficult for some natures as swimming is for some bodies. Though the human frame is lighter in its bulk than water, and that every person is born with the faculty, so few develop in themselves the art of treading water, that death by drowning is the most frequent accidents. This is a very interesting analogy Mahatma Ji has given. Break through the eggshell. This implies freeing the spirit completely from the material body. Like the planetary spirit, the divine self is completely free of the material self. That is the meaning of breaking through the eggshell. And the power of nirira namastak, that gets unfolded. What is this power? It allows the adept to produce from within his focus of consciousness a substitute of himself for the lower planes. That is what we saw in the earlier point, that the planetary spirit is able to create a substitute to guide his lower body on the terrestrial plane, and he himself exists on the higher plane. That is the power of Nirira Mastak. That means to produce from within his focus of consciousness, a substitute of himself. That is the power of Nirira Namastak. And this substitute functions in all respects, just as would the full inner spiritual person if he were present in the body, in exactly the same way that substitute will function. So this ability Mahatma KH is comparing to swimming. Swimming is a natural ability of the human body because human body is lighter than water, but still many people cannot swim and they drown. So this ability is compared to Nirira Namastak, that even after a person is free from his body, his spirit has become free from the body, still he cannot consciously go to higher planes and allow his body to function on lower planes because he does not know how to use the power of Nirira Namastak. Okay. So that is what he's trying to explain in this point. Now I'll quickly take one more slide and then we can close for today. The planetary spirit of that kind, that means the Buddha-like, it can pass at will into other bodies of more or less etherealized matter, inhabiting other regions of the universe. There are many other grades and orders, but there is no separate and eternally constituted order of planetary spirits. So to pass at will into other ethereal bodies, it refers to entering the subtle bodies of another being. It may be that, see, we know there are these subtle bodies, they are called Kosh in Vedanta, the Panchakosh. So the spirit can pass on into anybody else's body. He can enter the Pranamay Kosh, the Manomay Kosh, or the Vigyanmay Kosh, or the Anandmay Kosh. The Annamay Kosh is the physical body, and higher than that, the other four Kosh, they can be overshadowed by the spirit. So this is also called Parkaya Pravesh. That means to enter into the body of another being. And this is a very advanced kind of yoga. Being in the subtle body, those spirits, they can function in any region or any plane of the universe. And there are many kinds of planetary spirits, but there is no definite order. They can be of any type, but there is no definite classification or order given about them. Then the next point, whether imperator is a planetary, embodied or disembodied, whether he is an adept, in flesh or out of it, I am not at liberty to say any more than he would himself be to tell Stanton Moses who I am, or maybe, or even who HPB is. If he himself chooses to be silent on that subject, Stanton Moses has no right to ask me. We have seen that many times Imperator was Stanton Moses' own higher self. Sometimes it was one of the adept brothers, and at other times it was that Stanton Moses was under the influence of some astral entity whom he thought is the Imperator. But Mahatma KH would not reveal his identity since Imperator himself was silent about it. The adept brother who was guiding did not reveal his identity. So Mahatma KH also, it was not within his purview to reveal who the Imperator was. Stanton Moses was under probation and he was being tested. So it was not necessary to reveal to him this point. The fact that he seeks to learn through me the true nature of Imperator is a pretty good proof in itself that he is not sure of his identity as he believes he is, or rather would make believe he is. Or is the question a blind? Which? So Stanton Moses, though he would say that he is his spiritual guide, the Imperator is his spiritual guide, but he was not sure of it. Because had he been sure, he would not ask Mahatma KH to confirm the identity of Imperator. So he was not sure of who the Imperator was. Or the other thing is, was he testing Mahatma KH? Was he testing Mahatma KH that does the Mahatma knows who is the Imperator? So this is what Mahatma KH is trying to tell here. Why should he be asking him if he already knows who he is? So with this, we will bring today's session to a close, and we will continue in the next session because it's a very long letter. I think it will take 2 more sessions to complete the letter. So thank you very much for today.
Thank you, Vibha.
Okay, I request Meenakshi ji to give us the translation in Hindi now.
Yes.
नमस्ते, थैंक यू सिस्टर। आज हम लेटर नंबर 18 का अगला पार्ट ले रहे हैं। इसमें मास्टर कहते हैं कि एचपीबी को मिले आदेशों के तहत 1876 से उन्होंने स्टैंटन मोजेस को उसके आसपास और उसके अंदर क्या हो रहा है इस वास्तविकता से अवगत कराने की कोशिश की। उसने कई अन्य अवसरों पर एचपीबी को देखा और कभी कभी यह जानते हुए कि वह एचपीबी है, वह उन्हें पहचान नहीं सका। उसके हर एक पत्र में उसने एक लिविंग ब्रदर के लिए जोर शोर किया। वह पहले ही एक महात्मा के देखरेख में है, ऐसा एचपीबी ने स्पष्ट रूप से कहने पर भी उसने कड़ी आपत्ति जताई। जब उसे अपने भौतिक शरीर से मुक्त होने में मदद मिली, कभी कभी कई घंटों और दिनों तक विलग रहने पर उस अवधि के दौरान उसका खाली शरीर दूर से बाहरी जीवित प्रभावों से चलता था। जैसे ही वह अपने शरीर में वापस आ जाता, वह अपने दकियानुसी धारणा से सोचता कि वह उस संपूर्ण समय में एक अन्य सत्ता का वाहन था, एक प्रेतात्मा का, न कि एक देहधारी आत्मा का। सच्चाई कभी एक बार भी उसके मन में चमकी नहीं। उसने एचपीबी को लिखा, इंपरेटर मीडियमशिप के बारे में आपके विचार के परे जाता है। उसका कहना है कि एक मीडियम और महात्मा के बीच कोई प्रतिरोध नहीं होना चाहिए। यदि उसने मीडियम के स्थान पर दृष्टा शब्द का प्रयोग किया होता तो यह विचार अधिक सही ढंग से प्रस्तुत किया गया होता, क्योंकि कोई व्यक्ति जन्मजात दृष्टा हुए बिना शायद ही कभी एक महात्मा बनता है। सितंबर 1875 में वह ब्रदर्स ऑफ शैडो यानी वाममार्गी बंधुगण के बारे में कुछ नहीं जानता था। वे जो हमारे सबसे बड़े, सबसे निष्ठुर शत्रु हैं, और हम स्वीकार करते हैं कि वे हमारे सबसे संभावित प्रबल शत्रु हैं। उस साल उसने एचपीबी से पूछा कि कहीं बुलवर ने, जो कि एडवर्ड जॉर्ज बुलवर थे, उन्होंने उनकी ज़ैनोनी की कथा में दैट हिडियस ड्वेलर ऑफ थ्रेशोल्ड का वर्णन करते समय आधा पके सुअर के मांस के चौक खा रहा था और सपना देख रहा था। एचपीबी ने जवाब दिया, अपने आप को तैयार करो, लगभग 12 महीनों में आपको उनका सामना करना होगा और उनसे लड़ना होगा। अक्टूबर 1876 में उन्होंने उस पर अपना काम शुरू कर दिया था। स्टैंटन मोजेस ने लिखा, मैं लड़ाई लड़ रहा हूँ। पिछले 3 हफ्तों से शैतानों की पूरी फौज के साथ आमने सामने संग्राम हो रहा है। मेरी रातें उनकी यातनाओं, प्रलोभनों और गलत सुझावों के साथ खौफनाक हो रही है। मैं उन्हें अपने चारों ओर मुझे घूरते हुए, बड़बड़ाते हुए, चिल्लाते हुए, मुस्कुराते हुए देखता हूँ। हर प्रकार के मलिन सुझाव, भयावह संदेह, प्रचंड कपकपी वाला डर मुझ पर हावी है। अब मैं ज़ैनोनी के कथानक का ट्रेलर समझ सकता हूँ। मैं अभी तक डगमगाया नहीं हूँ और उनके प्रलोभन फीके पड़ गए हैं। उनकी उपस्थिति निकट नहीं है, दहशत कम है। एक रात एचपीबी ने अपने सद्गुरु को साष्टांग दंडवत करते हुए उनसे प्रार्थना की कि वे कुछ करे, नहीं तो स्टैंटन मोजेस मर जाएंगे। और थियोसॉफिकल सोसाइटी अपने श्रेष्ठतर सदस्यों को खो देगी। उसे आजमाया जाना चाहिए, ऐसा जवाब आया। वह कल्पना करता है कि इम्परेटर ने उन प्रलोभकों को भेजा था क्योंकि वह उन थॉमसों में से एक था जिन्हें अवश्य देखना चाहिए। वह विश्वास नहीं करेगा कि इम्परेटर उनके आने में मदद नहीं कर सकता। उसने जो किया उस पर ध्यान दे। वह उन्हें तब तक नहीं पछाड़ सकता जब तक कि स्वयं वह पीड़ित नवसाधक दृढ़ सबल प्रबल साबित न हो। लेकिन इन मनुष्य के दुश्मनों ने जो पिशाचों के साथ संगठित है, उन्होंने क्या स्टैंटन मोजेस को नए जीवन के लिए तैयार किया जैसे कि वह सोचता था कि वे ऐसा करेंगे। अंतरात्मा जो मुक्त होने और उन्नति करने के लिए संघर्ष करती रही है, उसे विघातक शक्तियों के जो मूर्तिमंत स्वरूप घेर लेते हैं, वे कभी वापस लौटकर नहीं आते। यदि स्टैंटन मोजेस ने अपनी निष्क्रिय इच्छा, अपनी माध्यमता को त्याग कर दृढ़ता पूर्वक अपने स्वयं की स्वतंत्र इच्छा शक्ति से उन पर सफलतापूर्वक विजय प्राप्त की होती, फिर भी उन शक्तियों ने अपना काम किया। एचपीबी ने आपको यानी सीनेट को कभी नहीं बताया कि इम्परेटर स्टैंटन मोजेस का एस्ट्रल सोल है, लेकिन वह जो अक्सर इम्परेटर के लिए गलत समझते थे, वह उनका अपना हायर सेल्फ था, उनकी दिव्य आत्मा, न कि लिंग शरीर या काम मनस या काम रूप। इम्परेटर स्वयं का खंडन नहीं कर सकता। इम्परेटर सच्चाई से अनजान नहीं हो सकता, जैसे कि अक्सर स्टैंटन मोजेस द्वारा गलत पेश किया जाता है। इम्परेटर गूढ़ विद्या संबंधी शिक्षा देकर फिर माध्यमता का पक्ष नहीं लेगा, उसके शिष्य द्वारा वर्णित उस उच्चतम रूप में भी नहीं। माध्यमता अस्वाभाविक है, ऐसा मास्टर कहते हैं। आगे के विकास में जब अस्वाभाविकता का रूपांतर स्वाभाविकता में होता है, नियंत्रक छूट जाते हैं और निष्क्रिय आज्ञाकारिता की आवश्यकता नहीं होती। तब माध्यम अपनी शक्ति के प्रयोग के लिए अपनी इच्छा का उपयोग करना सीखता है और एक सिद्ध हस्त बनता है। यह प्रक्रिया विकास क्रम में से एक है और नवसाधक को इसके आखिर तक जाना होता है। जब तक वह यदा कदा ट्रांस में नहीं जाता, वह एक सिद्ध हस्त अडेप्ट नहीं बन सकता। स्टैंटन मोजेस ने अपने जीवन का 2/3 हिस्सा ट्रांस में गुजारा है। क्या इम्परेटर एक प्लैनेटरी स्पिरिट है और क्या एक प्लैनेटरी स्पिरिट ने कभी मनुष्य जन्म लिया था? इस आपके प्रश्न पर मैं सर्वप्रथम यह कहूंगा कि ऐसी कोई प्लैनेटरी स्पिरिट नहीं है जो कभी स्थूल रूप में नहीं थी या जिसे आप मानव कहते हैं। हमारे महान बुद्ध जो सभी सिद्ध पुरुषों के संरक्षक है, गूढ़ प्रणाली के सुधारक और संहिताकार है, वे जब पृथ्वी पर सर्वप्रथम निर्वाण को प्राप्त हुए, वे एक प्लैनेटरी स्पिरिट बने, यानी उनकी चेतना एक ही समय में अपनी पूर्ण चेतना में तारामंडल इंटरस्टेलर स्पेस में भ्रमण कर सकती है और पृथ्वी पर अपनी इच्छा से अपने मूल और वैयक्तिक शरीर में रहना जारी कर सकती है, क्योंकि इस दिव्य आत्मा ने स्वयं को मैटर से पूर्णतः विमुक्त कर लिया था कि वे अपनी इच्छा से अपने लिए एक आंतरिक विकल्प बना सकते थे और न तो शरीर के मस्तिष्क या प्राण तत्व में किसी भी तरह के परिवर्तन के बिना उसे मानव रूप में कई दिनों तक, हफ्तों तक, कभी कभी सालों तक छोड़ते थे। हमारे ग्रह पर यह सिद्धत्व का सर्वोच्च स्वरूप है जिसकी मनुष्य आशा कर सकता है, लेकिन यह उतना ही दुर्लभ है जैसे कि स्वयं बुद्ध। आखिरी कोबिलगान जो इस तक पहुंचे थे वे 14वीं सदी में कोकोनर के सोंखापा, जो गूढ़ गुप्त लामावाद और साथ ही बहिरंगी लामावाद के सुधारक थे। कई ऐसे हैं जो बंधनों से, आवरणों से विमुक्त होते हैं, कुछ जो शरीर से पूरी तरह से बाहर हो जाने पर निरीर नमस्तक यानी मुक्ति का पूर्णतः अनुभव कर सकते हैं। आत्म चेतन जीवन कुछ मनुष्य स्वभावों को उतना ही कठिन है जितना कि कुछ मानवीय शरीरों के लिए तैरना। हालांकि मानव शरीर पानी की तुलना में उसके स्थूल रूप में हल्का होता है और सभी मनुष्य इस पात्रता के साथ जन्म लेता है। पानी में तैरने की कला को इतने कम लोग विकसित करते हैं कि अक्सर डूबने से मृत्यु होने की दुर्घटनाएं होती हैं। बुद्ध जैसे प्लैनेटरी स्पिरिट ब्रह्मांड के अन्य क्षेत्रों में निवास करने वाले थोड़े बहुत सूक्ष्म पदार्थ के बने अन्य शरीरों में अपनी इच्छा से जा सकते हैं। प्लैनेटरी स्पिरिट्स के कई अन्य श्रेणियां और प्रकार हैं, लेकिन उनके कोई अलग और चिरस्थायी रूप से गठित अनुक्रम नहीं है। क्या इम्परेटर एक व्यक्त या अव्यक्त प्लैनेटरी है? क्या वह स्थूल रूप या उसके विरहित एक सिद्ध पुरुष है? मुझे यह कहने की स्वतंत्रता नहीं है। जितना वह स्वयं स्टैंटन मोजेस को बताना चाहेगा उससे अधिक नहीं कि मैं कौन हूँ या एचपीबी कौन है। उस विषय में यदि वह स्वयं चुप रहना चाहता है तब स्टैंटन मोजेस को मुझसे पूछने का कोई अधिकार नहीं है। तथ्य यह है कि वह मेरे माध्यम से इम्परेटर के वास्तविक स्वरूप को जानना चाहता है। यह अपने आप में बहुत अच्छा प्रमाण है कि जितना कि वह मानता है या विश्वास करता है वह इम्परेटर की पहचान के बारे में उतना सुनिश्चित नहीं है। थैंक यू। नमस्ते।
Thank you, Meenakshi ji, for this very nice explanation. And now if we have any questions or anybody would like to discuss on this letter, they may please unmute and speak.
Yes, Sampad ji.
So I don't think there are any questions. Then we
Sital
can...
ji, do you like Sital ji? Yes. शीतल जी क्या क्वेश्चन है आपका? आपका रूम में कुछ साउंड आ रहा है, इसको बंद कर दीजिए, फिर क्वेश्चन पूछिए।
I think it's relating to Nirira Namastak. Is it?
Yes, शीतल जी, what is your question?
Yes, sir. वही निरेर निमस्तक थोड़ा और एक्सप्लेन करेंगे एक बार?
Nirira Namastak, it is the power, the divine power which unfolds when the being attains the stage of planetary spirit. So I give an example also, like how Sri Krishna sustains the whole world by one fraction of himself and he still remains. So in the same way, the planetary spirit, just by a fraction of his divine power, he can sustain the physical body on the earth. his being, his lower body, his lower self on the earth. He sustains that by a fraction of his being. And he himself is free to carry out his functions on the higher planes in full consciousness. So actually, through that power of Nirira Namastak, he is able to create a substitute for himself on the terrestrial plane. That is the meaning. And he will actually be functioning on the higher planes. Does this clarify, Sheetalji?
Yes, ma'am. Then are the adepts Nirir Namaste?
So in the next point, he mentions that it is not easy for everyone. The spirit might separate from the matter, but it is not possible for everyone to be able to function independently, independent on the terrestrial plane and consciously on the divine plane together. So even though the spirit and matter have been separated, to consciously function on two different planes, that power of Nirira Namastak, it is not possible for all. It has to be practiced like swimming.
So here they have not mentioned, Sheetalji, about the adept. Just it is given an example that human body like this. But mention conscious life in spirit is difficult, as difficult for some natures as swimming is for some bodies. So it is like that. So here, Sheetalji, in the text, it is not mentioned that about the adept. It mentioned probably like maybe some adepts who are not as developed like Gautam Buddha or our inner founders. Maybe it is difficult for them like that. But one thing I am going to add, Vibhaji, and that in this book or in this probably you will find that a planetary spirit, they can go anywhere they are like, even beyond the solar system, but they are prohibited to cross the limit. Means they cannot go, they have the power, like Lord Buddha has the power to go beyond the solar system, but they are not allowed to do that. Their consciousness, even if unlimited, they can go anywhere they like. Probably in this letter or somewhere I have read it. Of course,
I also heard it in some Mahatma letters only, no?
Yes, Mahatma letter.
Yes, that's correct. Even I have read it. They will be, the solar system, it's like the ring pass not. So they cannot cross it before that, what you can call Mahapralay. So only at that time when the solar system will dissolve, only then.
And in a previous paragraph, Vibhaji, there are some, I think it is maybe some, you will mark some plus in the previous paragraph of this letter.
Yes.
They are containing this paragraph to your question. Previous is you say of plus imperator. That is also there in the previous also. And then the imperator is removed. Plus means it is positive side probably, or white brotherhood or something they are mentioning. Then imperator removed, only positive. Positive cannot be ignorant of truth. Positive cannot contradict himself. Positive cannot preach actual science.
So
what is your opinion?
What I have understood in this letter, that plus sign denotes imperator.
Yes.
So it means imperator cannot contradict himself. Imperator cannot be ignorant of truth. And imperator cannot preach the occult science and then defend mediumship.
Okay.
That is what I mean.
All right. So we'll close.
Hello, sir. Namaskar.
Yes, yes.
Am I audible?
Right.
Yes.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
तो हमने कहीं ये पढ़ा था कि डॉक्टर एनिवेसेंट और लेडबिटर साहब ज्यादा डीप में चले गए थे कॉन्शियसनेस के, तो मास्टर ने कहा था कि ज्यादा डीप में मत जाओ, नहीं तो आपकी कॉन्शियसनेस वहीं चली आएगी, तो फिर ऊपर आना मुश्किल हो जाएगा, ऐसा कुछ।
Not, it is not literally, only Anivesen, while she was in deep meditation, she marked that some very long distance, some light is coming. So thought came to her mind that she will merge with that light. Then immediately Master M appeared and told her not to go with that light because you will be go billion years back or something like that. So he prohibited Anivesen not to merge yourself that light which is coming. You are right. Some book I remember, but you are right. Not literature. It is only Anivesen while she was in deep meditation. She marked that some light is coming. So she at that time wanted to join that or anyway, but then master appeared and told her not to do that. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Do you kindly close with the closing prayer?
So I think now we can bring the meeting
Yes,
to a
yes, we
close.
can close.
Okay, thank you all for joining. We'll end with the closing prayer. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Sarvesham Swastirabhavatu Sarvesham Shantirabhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Lokaha Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti.